light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show, I have my good friend Samuel Nez, and we've been having lots of interesting discussions about tribal dynamics and foundational principles and so forth. I wanted to continue that discussion within this episode, focusing as specifically as possible, I guess, on respect, tradition, renewal, and ingenuity, or that inventiveness that allows us to come up with a new solution to a problem maybe we hadn't ever encountered before. Starting with respect, to me it is not disrespectful to interrupt, and I encourage you to do so, simply because I grew up in a family of 7, so if you didn't interrupt, you never got a word in edgewise. So feel free, this is in a half hour, we're only going to scratch the surface anyway. Hopefully we'll give people some interesting things to think about. But it's kind of like a brainstorming session. Somebody referred to it as being like popcorn, where the ideas show up and they just start popping all over the place, and all popping at the same time. And, see what comes out, and allow our own creativity to be the guide. So for me, at least, it's not disrespectful to interrupt if you generally have something worth saying. If you have some new insight or perspective to offer. But I guess the rudeness part could go back to the witticism I heard a number of years ago that, do you have something to say, or do you just want to say something?
Well, as long as it has meaning behind it, or it's meaningful. Well, with respect, on the mind, I'm reminded of a meeting that I had attended once.
Okay.
I was working in a collaboration to bring indigenous modalities and holistic health into a clinic and a community. And I was at a very...
So this is the dynamics of tribal relationship applied to medical situations?
Well, not to medical situation, but the meeting on bringing that forth. And there were elders at this meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
it's the planning of a medical system.
Yeah, the planning of it, and it was a very traditional meeting, and I actually did not realize that at first.
You didn't realize how traditional it was? How
traditional it was, because I collaborate with these people, they collaborate with me, and so on and so forth, and usually I have an equal setting at the table. Okay. But being younger than the elders that were there, as soon as I sat down and looked around and realized, oh, this is going to be a very traditional meeting, and I'm not going to be able to say a whole lot.
So you could tell by looking around.
Yeah, because it was a very circular meeting, and all of the elders were more so on one side, and then more of the younger people on one side. And it wasn't necessarily separated, but it was just like the line of status, in a sense.
Okay.
So I'm sitting down at this meeting, and everybody is going back and forth, and we're sharing our ideas on how we can move forward with the general topic at this meeting. And one of my teachers looks over at me, and she gives me this look, and it's the "you better speak up" look. So okay. So there's the dynamic of respect where, oh, I better say something, and then well, I'm technically not supposed to say anything, but I can't disobey her. And so I'm sitting there, and it's like, okay, so I'm just going to see if this one can kind of blow over or whatever. And she cuts off somebody who was younger than her, and she, they're allowed to do that. And she goes, I think Samuel has something to say. And I, immediately...
You had no idea what to say.
Yeah, well, I had kind of been taking notes, planning on what would come out, but... It wasn't at all in context to what was going on. So I'm sitting there, and all the blood is just drained from my face, and I'm like looking, and it's like, oh goodness. And then I have to remember, well, she may have called me out, but I still have to have my respect for the rest of the elders. So in a traditional kind of meeting, you would have to ask permission. and you would kind of do a half stand up and say, "Do I have permission to speak?" And you have to wait
Okay.
for an acknowledgement of such, whether that's
Even having been identified.
even having been identified.
Okay.
There has to be, I would say, at least 3 other people who would want to listen to what I have to say. So I'm looking around, and I just asked for permission, and nobody's giving me the acknowledgement except for the one who had called me out. But I needed like 3 more, and so I'm looking around, and there's nothing, and I'm getting even more nervous, and it's like I really want to respect them, and finally I get 1 nod, and then I get 2, and then I get 3, and I mean a good 45, 50 seconds had gone by, and I mean that doesn't seem like a whole lot of time, but when you're waiting for permission in a quiet room,
it's dead silent in the room, and everyone's looking at you, that can be a long time.
Oh, it was a really long time, and I just remember being able to say everything, and then I sat down, and then you don't usually get acknowledgement for the rest of the thing, and it's not about like, well, what you say didn't matter, but you have to have that respect for them and wait for you to be called out again or for afterwards. And so being a traditional meeting, the meeting had ended, and then food is presented.
Okay.
And so we're all getting ready to grab food, and another aspect of the respect, because I think the most important thing in almost all cultures, especially in tribal settings, elders have the most respect out of all. You have to give them respect out of everything. And what I was taught is the youngest eat last.
Okay.
You have to wait until they all serve themselves, and so I'm sitting down at the table.
And yet, in another conversation, you commented that the children are the high priority.
Exactly. That's
So
where
I guess it would be a curious judgment call to see which way it goes.
So I know it would depend in some settings. So let's say it was like a ceremony for a coming of age.
Okay.
Sort of. I would assume that the younger people in the ceremony would eat first, and then everybody else. I'm not necessarily sure on that, but I know their priority only because of what we can offer them, and that's the most important thing is what can I offer to help you, whether it's wrong information.
Because they are going to become the leadership of the tribe at some point.
Exactly.
So you want to be sure that you haven't neglected the future leader of the tribe, so that they are able to be a good leader when the time comes.
So back to I'm waiting to eat, and kind of what you had just brought up is two of the elder people had come up to me and said, "Oh, go grab something to eat," and they're allowing me to go before them, but you never know if it's going to be a test or not. So oh, it's okay, I'll wait until everybody gets food and everything, and so they kind of give that little grin, and then they'll either, kind of like, oh, okay then, and then they go and get their food, or they'll grab you, and they'll say, come on, come grab some food. And I was lucky enough for someone to grab me and push me right in front of them, and it's like, oh, sweet. They're respecting me, and it's probably because
But they smiled because they were happy that you were recognizing the traditional behavioral patterns.
Mm-hmm. So that's just one aspect of the
In
respect.
a sense, they were proud of you for having demonstrated the tradition so well.
Oh, I was nervous. That was one of my first times in a meeting, a traditional meeting. But I was very lucky afterwards that a lot of them said they appreciated what I said and that I got it across, because I don't know how many times it's appropriate for someone so young to speak out in front of everybody and kind of call them on what's not being addressed. And one of the most important things is if you're going to do something, do it. Don't just talk about it. So I had to get that across. Like, it was only meeting number 2, but
and unfortunately there are times when the elders fail to notice something that needs to be addressed. And this very delicate dance of how you bring it to their attention without disrespecting them.
Oh yeah, there's procedure to a lot of things. So respect for the elders is probably the most notable kind of respect. And then next to that, there's probably respect for ceremony, story, tradition.
Well, and ideally, something doesn't become a tradition unless there's a very good reason for it being there. So we may not know the reason initially, but if it is tradition, I guess recognizing that would be the invitation to figure out why it's important. to learn the history of the development of that particular tradition. I'm reminded of an anecdote of this church that was having a new dedication or something, and someone came down the aisle carrying this tall pole with a cross on top, and got to the end of the main aisle and went to the where you would be entering into the altar area, and got down on his knees and walked a few steps forward and then stood up and continued. And when someone asked later why he did that, he said it's a gesture of respect. And the same thing was repeated the following Sunday, and there was an elderly man in the back of the church who had been a member of the church for 50 years. And when he saw that, he busted out laughing. And they're like, "What?" And he said, "No, the reason we did that is because there used to be a wrought iron framework, and you had to bend down in order to get underneath it." But the framework was no longer there, but they were still doing the motion.
Oh, goodness.
Not realizing where it had come from or why it was there. And he said, no, it wasn't about respect. It was about not hitting the cross on the iron framework. 'Cause like low bridge, duck as you come through.
Well, it makes me wonder if they had that there to make you have a sign of respect.
I think at one time the framework was probably there to distinguish between the allegedly holy area from the allegedly common area. And so, yeah, respect kind of figures into it. But it becomes an opportunity for a consensus decision that if the worship space changes, do we want to include a gesture of respect, and if so, what kind, and what's appropriate so that it doesn't become that silly sort of bowing for something that's no longer there.
It made me wonder because with the sweat lodge, the Inipi, the Temazcal, which would be the Maya or the Mexica kind of sweat lodge.
Okay.
They make the door very small and very low, and the reason they do that is so not just so you're forced, but so you know that you have to enter low, so you're humble when you enter.
Okay.
So I was just curious if that's why they had that there and it was so low, because in the sweat lodge it is low. That way you do have to bow.
Okay.
Just curious.
Well, and it raises the question: if the sweat lodge was going to be brought forward, would it ever be appropriate to do a sweat lodge at a steam room, or some other facility that did not involve branches with buffalo hides over the top, or whatever it was, blankets, whatever was used?
It all changes now. I mean, the Temazcal is made out of adobe.
Okay.
Only because they settled, and the Inipi Lakota sweat lodges because they were Plains Indians and they moved a lot. So.
Okay. So the question of whether you have a portable sweat lodge or whether you have a permanently built one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you build one, what characteristics you want to incorporate so that the essence of the practice remains constant?
Well, so that reminds me.
Does that mean you have an exhaust fan, for example, if it gets too hot?
Well, I don't know about that, but...
You've never seen one with an exhaust fan?
I've never seen one with an exhaust fan.
That was just a silly suggestion. It was not a serious comment.
Well, yeah, you never know. I mean, in the Temazcal, the fire is a part of the structure, and the firekeeper has to actually bring down the heat and clear out the room and everything by hand. So
okay,
maybe in the future it might make sense to add an exhaust fan, make it a lot easier. I know when I was doing it, my arm got tired. Ooh.
The question, I guess, in my mind is whether there were preparations or allowances for the possibility of medical emergencies.
Now there is.
Okay.
I know when I was a part of building at the Temazcal we had to make sure everything was right. We had to be in contact with the not the fire guard, because it's up in the mountains, and I mean a lot of times you always have to worry about forest fires. So fire marshal. We'd have to contact the fire marshal, we would have somebody on staff who...
And if they said the fire
restrained-
danger was too high because of too dry conditions in the forest,
No sweat lodge.
no sweat lodge. It would simply have to be postponed.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, tradition changes a little bit because with the sweat lodge, it does.
Before we leave that point, though, the reason that would stick in my mind with a little bit more protest is that, number one, a sweat lodge doesn't involve any open flames anyway. Correct?
Oh, no, it does.
It does.
Well, it depends on the sweat lodge, I guess. But
Okay.
a lot of times now, a traditional sweat lodge has open flames. So in the Unipi, the stones are the grandmothers, grandfathers are heated directly in a fire, and then they're brought in. And at the Mescal, so you have the round spot here,
Okay.
you have the fire, and you have the stones just here. And so the fire is a permanent structure, and it heats up the stones. You take the fire out, you clean it all up, and the stones are hot.
Yeah.
And you don't have to move them.
Mhm.
But there is open flame, and you always have to be careful.
It would seem to me, though, that preparations could be made because to say that you can't have a sweat lodge because of the fire danger, to me, would make that's an infringement on religious freedom.
Oh, well,
You know, and
American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978, so on and so forth. I mean, you have to, if, let's say I went to
well,
prison.
even in the basic United States Constitution,
Yeah.
in the Bill of Rights, one of the foundational ones is freedom of religion.
So I always joke around with my friends that if I went to prison and I said, oh, I want a sweat lodge, they're required by law to either send me to a prison that has one or they have to build one where I'm at. It's kind of,
okay.
it's an ongoing joke with that, but
Are they going to build one in the prison?
I know that there are actually a few prisons that have sweat lodges there, and
Okay.
it's quite interesting. I guess that's a part of the ingenuity now.
My only point being that there would have been a way to deal with the fire danger without postponing the sweat lodge.
Well, so bringing the ingenuity a part of the topic. Some of the temazcals now are being heated by propane. Propane instead of actual fire. I know. I said the same thing. Oh my. So they'll have this.
Then if there was a fire danger, all you do is turn the valve off and the flame goes out.
Essentially, it's apparently
Totally
it's
safe.
a lot more. It's cleaner and maintenance, and the only thing that you always have to worry about is carbon monoxide. But I mean, even if there was like a wood fire in there, you have to worry. But that's part of the ingenuity, bringing in the tradition.
Have a healthy amount of airflow.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously not so much that it diminishes the effects of the sweat lodge, but enough that there is no physical danger.
Exactly. It makes me, everything kind of contradicts, because I mean, with the ingenuity and the respect, it's like, well, are you still respecting the sweat lodge if you're using propane? But I guess if you're doing it in that good way.
I would say you are if you're holding on to the essence of it. I mean, you're still using fire.
Mm-hmm.
It's not wood generated, but it's still fire. You're still using hot rocks or hot stones, so that's consistent. You're still regarding it as a spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the teachings about the meaning of it can be retained.
You're just kind of renewing.
You're changing the form slightly,
Yeah.
but the experience itself hasn't really changed.
I would say no. As I hold that reverence whenever I go into a sweat lodge, or even when I go into a steam room. An example would be a couple years ago, I went to a place called Ojo Caliente, and they had the steam room there, and they have hot springs, and there was a little plaque outside of the steam room that said traditional Native Americans used to go into steam baths as a ritual form and everything. And I'm looking at it's a glass door.
Which traditional
Right.
You didn't recognize the reference.
I was like, this is a sweat lodge in a sense. Okay, they just put it in a box with a glass door now. So we're looking at it, and it's all steamy inside, and I was thinking, I don't know, do I hold this reverence in there, or am I just kind of enjoying a day at the spa or whatever? But because that plaque had reminded me, I ended up, bowing down to it and giving my intentions and my prayers that I went in, and I enjoyed it. But
does that mean the others who are not respecting it as a sweat lodge were being disrespectful?
That's...
I mean, since it was posted that's what it had been used in the past, does that mean that all the tourists or whomever who come to use this steam bath should regard it as sacred space.
Well, it makes me wonder if that's why they added the little plaque, the thing that described that is, this is sacred space. But I mean, people go into churches all the time and they don't think of it as sacred space. I mean, if you went to, not
Well,
saying
I
you,
do.
but let's say...
I get in arguments with people sometimes about, excuse me, you are in church.
Well, like the Notre Dame in is it Paris?
Okay.
People...
The cathedral.
The cathedral. A lot of people will go there just to be tourists. Oh, look at that. Oh, stained glass and all that. And I'm looking at them like, because I did grow up with a Catholic background. I'll look at them and it's like,
Yeah.
Holy water. But
The one time I was there, if I remember correctly, they essentially had it roped off so that the center part where the pews was considered sacred space, and tourists were to keep themselves to the back and side aisles. Okay, it's one way of marking it out to serve both purposes. I guess to me it would make more sense, instead of having the plaque outside the steam baths, to have a one of these sign holders things where you can post something in and close it. Like an enclosed a glass case over a bulletin board or something.
Okay.
And to have it posted, during these hours, this cathedral will be used for worship services. No tourists allowed, or no photo pictures allowed.
So to have it scheduled for sacred space.
Yeah, and the same with the steam baths, to say, not to have it up there all the time, but to say that during these hours, this is considered sacred space. Everyone who enters during this time will be expected to treat it as such.
Well, I don't know if we'll do that at Ojo Caliente, because it is a kind of a day spa. I mean, it's hot springs and everything, but it would make sense to do that in some cases.
If they're not going to do that, I would say remove the plaque.
Yeah.
Because you're sending mixed messages.
Well, I remember when I entered, it was, to me, it was sacred space, but I don't know if the guy next to me, if it was sacred space.
Well, and people relate to sacred space in different ways.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there are people who go into Catholic churches and, don't have any sense of reverence about them. They're there because they're fulfilling some religious obligation, or because somebody told them to, or, I just came because of him or her or whatever. I came because my wife said so. I came because my husband said so. I came because it's Christmas Eve and this is what we do on Christmas Eve. It's not about an awareness of sacredness. In the few minutes we have left, though, it's the whole point of this discussion is to bring these things back to consciousness. That we have our traditions. We want to be respectful, but we also need renewal. Well, and sometimes it requires ingenuity to figure out how.
The topic, I think, is perfect, especially in reference to the sweat lodge, because, I mean, one, the sweat lodge is very traditional. A lot of natives have respect for the sweat lodge. And then to bring in the next two is about bringing in new ideas, ingenuity and renewing behind it. So it's like with the steam room, to me, you could that's ingenuity alone, is having the sweat lodge. Let's renew the consciousness behind it.
Which opens the possibility, if you're going to a steam room that is not designated as sacred space, you can, of your own volition, do a bow before you go through the door, go inside, close your eyes, and create a steam room within sweat lodge within your mind. And visualizing yourself spiritually, emotionally, psychologically going through the whole experience of the sweat lodge on your own. Who's going to say anything? Because you're just sitting there with your eyes closed. You can have your own experience. You can experience all the benefits of a sweat lodge ritual. And when you have completed it within your visualization, you can open your eyes and bow respectfully to space and exit. And you can be having a spiritual experience even if nobody else is.
Well, that sounds like another topic, is, personal spiritual experience.
There's nothing that forbids using the space that way. I mean, that's the ingenuity part, you know, where you, in our final few seconds, just to be clear, the purposes for a sweat lodge: personal renewal,
cleansing, connection with a higher power other than yourself.
So if you're trying to make a difficult decision on something,
sometimes you would go into a sweat lodge to make a decision.
If you want a more effective prayer, intercession on behalf of someone, or not? Would you do a sweat lodge experience in order to connect with spirit to say, please help this person who's suffering?
Yes, that you would do that.
So intercession, your own renewal, your own cleansing,
essentially
decision making.
I could say Catholics have churches, natives have sweat lodges.
So anything you would do in a church, you could do in a sweat lodge.
Yeah, well, in some cases, yeah. I mean, sweat lodges, there's a lot of use behind it. I mean, in the Temazcal, sometimes they do births in there, and I wouldn't necessarily do a birth in a church, but.
So it's any major decision or transition in life.
Essentially, a sweat lodge is just a very sacred space to us.
Well, and that's the best note to end on, to remember it's sacred space, whether made by someone declaring it such or by the way you approach it. It's sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to me is the perfect juxtaposition of respect, tradition, renewal, and ingenuity, coming back to sacredness.